Starting off, we have Kara Podkaminer from the DOE to start us off, and then Ray Minyaris, the International Council on Clean Transportation, Jed Proctor from Daimler Truck, and Adam Raphael from Amazon. So we'll get started with Kara. Why don't you take it away?
Find the unmute button. Excellent. Well, thank you so much. It's really nice to see some familiar faces. For those of you I haven't met, my name is Kara Podkaminer. I'm a senior advisor for sustainable transportation and fuels at DOE and help lead our vehicle grid integration work and help organize sessions like this. So I'm really excited to have the speakers today to talk about medium and heavy duty vehicles. I think big picture, the costs are rapidly declining. We put out some analysis to the National Renewable Energy Lab. I get the date wrong. I think it was last February, really showing how the costs are coming down, and that, when we think about medium and heavy duty owners, and fleet owners, they're really looking for cost-effective solutions, whether that's in how you, purchase the vehicle or how you charge it. And so I think big picture, that really indicates the possibility of a transition much more quickly than even in the light duty fleet. And so I think this is something that is on all of our minds as we're seeing more electric trucks come on the market. How do we ensure that we have sort of an ecosystem that is supporting them, making sure we're getting wires there in time, make sure we have rates and managed charging approaches that can really ensure that those vehicles are an asset to the grid and finding least cost solutions. All of this is certainly enabled by a policy framework. So what's happening in California with the Advanced Clean Truck Rule and the Clean Fleet Rule, as well as at the federal level with EPA's proposed rules covering medium and heavy duty vehicles. So I think there's a lot of certainty building around this. And we'll hear today from an OEM, a truck manufacturer, as well as a fleet owner and operator of how they're making those purchase decisions and what they're looking for as they work to get those trucks online, those charging stations energized in a timely way, and how can we be thinking the ways in which we need to support them. I think one small anecdote that maybe someone will reiterate with more detail, but that you can buy a truck, on say a 6-month timeline. It's a lot harder to get power there on that the amount of power that a truck would need on that same time frame. And so how do we start thinking about that in a way that meets the needs of these customers? On the DOE side, or the federal government side, we have a few things going on. I have other colleagues on the line that if we need to fill in some details, hopefully can help me. But last year, or maybe earlier this year, we awarded a number of planning grants to help states come together and think about where are these corridors, where do we have charging and refueling infrastructure. This was both from a hydrogen and electric vehicle perspective, but really getting that planning thinking so that we're being proactive. Where are we going to need that load? In addition, funding through the bipartisan infrastructure law that is housed at the Department of Transportation, but informed by the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation that sits between DOE and DOT. They are currently evaluating grants for the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Program, which looks at both community and corridor grants. So some awards are expected in the fall. Right now, there's about $700 million, but the program in full is around $2.5 billion. So I think the message is that there's charging infrastructure that's coming. There's a lot of trucks that are coming, and so how do we think proactively so that we get ahead of the game and it's not always trying to just react because of that misalignment in timing. And so I'm really excited to hear from our speakers today to help set the stage of where is that load coming? When is it going to show up? In what locations? How are the truck manufacturers thinking about that? What are they hearing from their customers? And then how fleets are actually operating? What are they looking for during this transition? And finally, looking forward to hearing from you all on what the questions you have. How can we as DOE help you? What are the tools and assessments that build confidence around this coming transition so that we can respond and help you meet your needs. So with that, maybe quickly, Chris, I don't know if you have any other thoughts that you want to add.
Yeah, Kara, thanks. So this is Chris Irwin. I work in the Office of Electricity on Advanced Grid R&D, partner to Kara on the vehicle grid integration work, and also under the EV Grid Assist umbrella banner that we all sort of collaborate under. A couple things that I think that you're going to hear, and that we really want to hear ideas about and things like that, has to do with grid transparency and the need to exchange information in the face of sensitivities. Is I've heard some conversations where it's like, well, if you just disclose all of your business plans that you consider confidential and sensitive, then we can be your planning partner. Or if you disclose the full nature of the grid and all the assets on it, then we can be your partner. These are, let's just say, primitive overtures to information sharing. I think that the NARUC pioneering work on the grid data sharing framework may be an excellent tool to use to explore that. But we all need to be able to operate on better information than we have today. And we need to find ways to do it that are elegant and reproducible across the country. So that's just what I wanted to reinforce as we go into this.
Great. Well, I will turn it back over to Danielle, and I think Ray might be our first speaker.
I can take it if we're all finished here. If anyone has any questions for either Kara or for Chris, we can open it up to any Q&A for the DOE. I don't see anything in the chat or any hands up, but I'll pause just for a second and see if there's any dialogue that we want to have with the DOE. And if not, we can move on to our next presentation. Okay. Well, if anything comes up, please feel free to add it to the chat at any time. And in the meantime, we'll move on to Ray Minyares from with the International Council on Clean Transportation. Ray?
Thank you very much, Commissioner, and thanks to the staff for the invitation. I'm Ray Minyares, and I am the director of the Heavy Duty Vehicles Program, and I work for the International Council on Clean Transportation. We are an international research organization, primarily providing technical guidance and support to regulators of vehicle emissions and their fuels. So in this instance, we're here talking about electricity, a key fuel for the transportation fleet going forward. I'm focusing on heavy-duty vehicles, and so you can think of those basically as school buses, refuse trucks, last-mile delivery vehicles, tractor-trailer trucks, delivery vans, and other types of heavy on-road vehicles that are primarily powered by, today, diesel engines. And so what I have to share today with you is some research that this organization, the ICT, has produced just this year to help all of you understand where, when, and how much charging infrastructure this fleet is going to need as it electrifies over the coming decades. Let's move on to the next slide, please. First, I want to set the stage and the context for the transition, and looking at it primarily from the economics perspective. The Inflation Reduction Act has, by some, been characterized as a climate bill, and for good reason, because it provides significant incentives to support vehicle electrification, which is significantly increasing the energy efficiency of our fleet. So our projections, based on the magnitude of incentives that the IRA makes available, is that at the national scale, the heavy-duty vehicle segment, including all those vehicle types I just mentioned, is on track to reach about 44% zero-emission vehicle sales by 2030. That's the moderate scenario within kind of a upper and lower bound. So, there is some uncertainty around that particular number. But as we look at that particular number, we can see that it's driven by the fact that total cost of ownership of these vehicles is projected to fall dramatically as a consequence of the decline in battery prices and the help that these incentives are providing. I also want to make a point here that we see battery-powered vehicles as being more economical, especially in the near term, than fuel cell-powered trucks. And so, one key takeaway from this is we don't need to wait for hydrogen to electrify the truck fleet. For a lot of vehicle types today, it's already economical to pursue battery-powered technologies, but as time passes, especially over this decade, we will see that total cost of ownership parity basically be reached for every truck segment. So the point is, it's really important to focus on how we're delivering power, meaning electricity, directly to those vehicles through charging. Next slide, please. Another way to emphasize that point, we looked at one of the most energy intensive vehicle types in the heavy duty sector, and that is the long haul tractor trailer. Think of a big rig or 18 wheelers that you might see passing through your cities. What we looked at was what we expect the total cost of ownership would be for a battery-powered long-haul tractor in 2030. So imagine a tractor that's driving 500 miles a day. It has 1 megawatt hour worth of batteries. It has access to megawatt charging. And let's say it has one driver. So this is the scenario that we looked at in 7 different states. And what we found was a pretty common pattern, taking into account this bottoms-up approach to how utilities are pricing their electricity. And that pattern is that by 2030, at least in these 7 states that we evaluated, we project that these battery electric tractors will be cheaper to own and operate than the diesel equivalent tractor. That being said, we can't say the same thing for hydrogen fuel cell or a hydrogen internal combustion engine tractors to other technologies that are available to transition away from diesel fuel in this particular segment. So again, reinforcing the point that this is really a story about charging and about vehicle electrification that's going to require the necessary infrastructure to support the delivery of that power. Next slide, please. Okay, so given that context, we have a speaker on this panel who will talk about the vehicle product availability. We're confident that the products are coming onto the market. They are commercialized. People are buying them. They're ready to own and operate electric vehicles. And that's supported in very large part by the total cost of ownership and the dynamics, as I mentioned, with the IRA incentives. So it begs the question, is the infrastructure ready to support what we see as a pretty favorable business environment for investing in battery electric vehicles? Next slide, please. Okay, so what did the ICT do? What we did was we looked nationwide at where charging infrastructure would need to be located, when it would need to be available, and then how much power would need to be accessible in those particular locations. Next slide, please. Just to give you first a sense for how we approach this, this is just a map of average daily truck traffic for all of those different vehicle types I mentioned in the United States in the year 2017. Now, these patterns haven't changed much. Here we're in 2023. It's important to recognize key ports and corridors that this particular, and also in Northern California in the I-5 corridor all the way up to Seattle and points north. The Northeast corridor as well. Think about sort of Maryland and DC area, kind of northward to Boston, and other key kind of nodes within, say, the Midwest and the Appalachian and southern parts of the United States. This is the map upon which charging infrastructure needs to be planned for. Next slide, please. Taking that into account, and also taking into account the effects and the impacts of the various incentives, we did an infrastructure readiness assessment based on this particular scenario of zero-emission truck deployments. So these are, to be clear, class 4 to 8 medium and heavy-duty vehicles that are affected by incentives. We project that buses will be on U.S. roads, according to this particular scenario. And that is equal to about 10% of the heavy-duty vehicle fleet in 2030. I'm not showing years past 2030, but once we're into 2035, then we're looking at 20% of the fleet and so on. So this is a clear ramp up that's happening right now. And today we're at less than 1% of sales that are zero emission. Next slide, please. Now to some of our results. These are two maps. These are showing average projected daily energy consumption for zero emission medium and heavy duty vehicles by US county. So what becomes clear in this map is the progression over time from 2025 to 2030, and also the ways in which this demand is concentrated. This is not even growth across the country. There will be some states and some counties in those states that are going to experience an incredibly significant demand relative to what they're used to from these electric trucks that are coming on the roads. And that's simply explained by the fact that there are certain parts of the country where we have significant freight activity. So if you are in a state that has a major US port, or that has a major US freight corridor that's passing through it, this is a trend in vehicle electrification that you need to be paying attention to. This is not going to follow the pattern that light-duty vehicle electrification has followed, because we're not talking about homes and businesses that are spread out throughout your jurisdiction. We're talking again about key ports, key, let's say, near port destinations like warehouses, and then the corridors that are connecting these various parts of the freight network. Next slide, please. So I believe the next slide here is going to start to get into some numbers, and I wouldn't focus too much on the specific numbers here, but what I want you to take away from this particular slide is, again, the magnitude and the concentration. So the headline of this slide is that the top 1% of US counties will account for 15% of the national charging needs in 2030. So that's 30 counties, up roundabouts, 30 counties out of 3,000 plus US counties will be 15% of those charging needs. This table is giving you the top 10 that we've identified. 4 of them are in Southern California: Los Angeles, Riverside, San Diego, San Bernardino counties. 3 of them are in Texas: Dallas, Texas, Harris County, what's the other one? Bexar County. That's the Texas Triangle. So, it's clear from this work as we've been sharing the results, how much of this is coming to places like California and Texas. Not seen here really is New York and Illinois. And then, of course, all the corridors that are feeding and supporting the major ports in those particular places. But what is also clear from this work is that when we think about the total energy demand, we're projecting that by 2030, the sales of electricity for electric trucks will be just 1% of total electric retail sales as they are today, meaning it's not a lot of energy, relatively speaking, for the US as a whole. The issue is this concentration of demand in these particular locations. And so for LA County, which is our number 1 on this assessment, we're projecting a need for close to 1 gigawatt of nameplate capacity to support all of the megawatt chargers and overnight chargers that are there, that will be co-located with the Port of LA and Long Beach. So that's a real need, and it puts a significant urgency on ensuring that these particular counties are receiving the right attention, and that there is an ability to respond quickly to the rapid potential growth in demand. Next slide, please. This just to make a point about publicly accessible charging, because just as we have, let's say with light duty vehicles, there is an expectation that trucks will be charging overnight. Think of school buses, refuse trucks. Those make a lot of sense to charge overnight at the depot. And so there will be charging and the needed distribution grid capacity to support those particular depots and warehouses, right? But then there's also going to be the publicly accessible charging network that will support the vehicles that are going longer distances. And this is where it's especially important for those tractor trailers, the long haul trucks that are going 500 miles and more. So our projection is that by, let's say, 2030, we will need to see publicly accessible charging depots that have a capacity for about 6 megawatts of charging. The biggest of those are that are going to be on the most trafficked road segments, those that are 75% and above the average daily traffic, are going to be at about 13 megawatts in 2030. So when it comes to this particular sector and this level of electrification, it's important to be thinking in megawatts, just to be clear, and important to be thinking, let's say, already down at the Port of LA, we're seeing installations of 5 megawatts at the Port of Long Beach, and other projects that are at least that starting point, and that will probably be larger than that over time. Next slide, please. I think this is my last slide. So what I wanted to end with here is just some thoughts about how to what to be thinking about now, given what the data are showing is the business environment, the possibility and the potential rapid growth that we see in this vehicle electrification. For those of you that are in a position to provide power or authorize investments in providing the power at the utility side, obviously beneficial electrification means maximizing the use of existing grid capacity today. And so clearly there are solutions in the near term, like load rebalancing, potentially tapping into non-firm distribution capacity, exploring technologies like dynamic line rating and smart charging, right? Those are the things that make sense to maximize existing grid capacity today. But my sense is that that's not going to be enough, particularly over the next 3 to 5 years, as you get, potentially, multiple applications unexpected for 5 megawatts or greater of power. So it's important to be thinking about how to increase flexibility within your IOUs and other regulated utilities to invest in that load growth in the near term. So it's important to be thinking about maximum flexibility that you can provide through balancing accounts, for example, which is a balancing account is pretty familiar to an IOU. But those utilities are really going to need some endorsement, some consent, as my sense, to use balancing accounts to support this type of rapid load growth and investment. Obviously, there are also public funding sources that are key. DOE loan programs, we've got tens of billions of dollars potentially available through DOE loan programs that can be helping utilities today. That helps limit the impact on ratepayers. But then there's also allowing for a greater share of third-party finance. There are fleets and investors that are prepared to share in the investment, to share in the ownership of the asset. And I see significant potential to tap into that private sector-led finance. I think that can also come with that ability for them to invest in some of these assets can also come with the responsibility that they deliver on a particular timeline, and that also they are meeting the specifications that the utilities themselves would meet themselves. And then finally, on load growth, just planning for the long term. Planning needs to start today. It should have already started if it hasn't already started. So what does that mean? It means explicitly including transportation load forecasts into distribution system planning. And then it also, in those territories where it makes sense, can include things like authorizing or planning ahead for grid infrastructure in what I call no regret freight zones and corridors, the places where we've had ports for decades and they're not going anywhere, right? We know there will be freight electrification near ports. So, and especially in states where there is a requirement to achieve 100% zero emission electrification. So those are some common sense solutions that I hope we can talk about and take some questions on to help you think about how to get ahead of this. I believe that's my last slide. So I'm happy to pause there, take any questions, or stick on a line for the discussion to follow. So thank you very much. I'll hand it back.
Thanks, Ray. Really appreciate it. I'm gonna start with a question or two, and anyone else, please feel free to jump in as well. So I'm curious about your evaluation of fuel cells that you went through at the beginning. You mentioned that their fuel cells, hydrogen fuel cells, are limited by the fact that batteries are cheaper. Do you see a role for hydrogen fuel cells in clean transportation for medium and heavy duty eventually? Because like lithium-ion batteries have been on the commercial pathway for longer, so they've had more of an opportunity to come down that cost curve. And I'm not sure that hydrogen fuel cells have had that same opportunity. So do you see that changing in the future, or any cost reductions for fuel cells in the future, or do you truly just expect lithium-ion batteries to fully win out?
Great question. So the first thing I'll say is that there are, what I presented is primarily based on the economics, right? So what we're looking at is what is the cost of the vehicle today and how is that cost projected to decline over time? And so just starting with that, clearly the cost of both battery powertrains and hydrogen fuel cell powertrains are going to decline over time. The other cost component here, though, is the energy cost. What is the cost of electricity, and what is the cost of hydrogen? And also, to be clear, we're just looking at green hydrogen here. We're not looking at a fossil hydrogen solution, which would be cheaper. So assuming you are pursuing green hydrogen, basically the break-even point in these two, based on our assessment, is about $3 to $5 per kilogram of green hydrogen. So if you are at that level, then there's a business case to make for a hydrogen fuel cell tractor. And that is assuming you're at an electricity price of somewhere between 15 and 30 cents per kilowatt hour. That's a levelized cost that's including infrastructure and other types of assets. The problem becomes, how quickly can the price of green hydrogen come down? And our expectation is that by 2030, the retail price of green hydrogen on average in the US is probably going to still be around $9 to $11, which is about twice what it needs to be in order to have a strong business case to compete with that battery solution. So it comes down to the economics. Now, there will be fleets that will still invest in hydrogen. And that is a zero emission solution. And, we know that vehicle manufacturers are hearing what fleets are wanting and they are going to be offering fuel cell solutions. But the reason why I start with this point is because I don't want that hydrogen discussion to be a distraction to what is the need right now, which is to build the charging infrastructure for a solution that already has a strong business case, right? So that's where I think the business case, because it's already there and is stronger, it makes sense to assume that the market will follow what is the most affordable zero emission solution first, and that there will probably still be some remainder for hydrogen fuel cell nevertheless.
Well, that makes sense. Thanks. Carrie, you have your hand up?
Make sure I just want to reiterate that last point, because I think part of this is, the end state, there is uncertainty around what technologies and what those paths are. But I think the last point that Ray, you said is like, we have a lot of certainty on these near-term steps, and that being proactive and getting that infrastructure out is really important. So I think part of that is on us to sort of take some of that end state distraction out and help think about what are the near-term steps, and that there's a lot of load growth here. And one of the things that I always say is, even if it's hydrogen, that probably is going to take a lot of electricity as well. So, I guess I just caution to say that even if there is uncertainty of what that final technology mix is, there's a lot of near-term, within some bounds, certainty around the need for infrastructure, both on the charging and the grid side, and that we can't let uncertainty stop us from acting now.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I do think that the load would look different between an electrolyzer to create green hydrogen versus a vehicle that needs to charge in a certain amount of time, because it's spending money to sit there stationary. But I think it's a good point that there's going to be a lot more electricity needed for all of this. Eric?
Thank you. It looks to me like this forecast is more driven by the economics than it is about a policy assumptions. If I understand that right, maybe you also included something that was driving that the California versus New York was maybe more policy. But I wonder about we just didn't seem to see the same amount of growth in New England, and I wonder if there was an economic explanation for that rather than a policy one.
That's an excellent set of questions and points, and I'm very glad you raised that, because first on the policy assumption. So what we are assuming here is what we know has been adopted in various states with respect to ACT. So that's the Advanced Clean Trucks rule, which requires manufacturers to sell zero-emission trucks. That does include states like New York and New Jersey and Massachusetts and Colorado. I believe we also have California, Oregon, and Washington State there. So we're assuming that advanced clean fleets is not a part of this particular scenario, but that is something that we will include in a follow-up update to the study. With respect to what you're seeing in the maps themselves, and it might be helpful to cycle back to that particular slide, but there is in this particular map a problem in the way we're presenting the data, which is its absolute daily energy consumption, and it's not normalized by area. So what that tends to do visually is it actually perhaps overemphasizes the largest counties and de-emphasizes the smallest ones, because what you're missing here is the density. And so in our study, and a link to it is below there, there's actually an additional discussion of what are the top counties ranked in terms of average daily energy consumption normalized by square mile. And in the top 10, the first, I believe, 5 are counties in New York State. So in fact, maybe even that map of freight activity is a better illustration of that point, that there is an incredible density and concentration of freight activity starting from, that basically DC metro area north to Massachusetts, including all points in between, and especially that tremendous sort of port, the port of New York and New Jersey, where there's a significant concentration of freight activity. So in other words, I hope that the map isn't discounting the fact that Northeast corridor is in fact a significant and high priority zone for planning for freight infrastructure.
That's interesting, Eric. I actually noticed a similar thing, and my engineering brain went to a different place. I thought that it was because it was warmer in the south, and electric vehicles tend to perform better in warmer climates than in the colder climates of the north. But it turns out it's actually just they have larger counties in the south, it sounds like, than in smaller counties in the north. So that's interesting. I always like being able to dig into data like that. Eric, I saw that you had another question in the chat too. Did you want to did you want to Ray, I'm not sure if you saw that, address this question too. Eric asked if the total cost of ownership analysis, what's the assumed average charging speed in megawatts?
In the total cost of ownership analysis, in megawatts, we're assuming 1 megawatt.
And at that capacity, that's in a very industrial load tariff that you would typically see for a utility. And so would that present negative cost savings and or often in your analysis for fuel costs?
It's difficult for me to answer that question because I think I would need my lead author on that study to give you the answer. But what I can share with you is that the approach we took to gathering the rates themselves was to identify one utility in each one of these states and to ask them, given this particular customer, right, who's coming with 1 megawatt charging, what rate would you apply? So it's hard for me to say because I wasn't into all the details of it, whether they gave what today's rates are, or what the rates are that they might have available that others aren't using, or what they might provide. So it'd be worth actually digging into that a little bit and working on a solid answer to your question. But I think it's well taken.
Thank you very much.
Well, thanks so much, Ray, for the presentation. I thought this was really interesting. I really like being able to dig into some of the data behind all of this and see some of the projections on such a granular level that you have coming out of this. So really appreciate this presentation. I do want to move on to our next presenter. We've gone over a little bit. Next, we have Jed Proctor from Daimler Truck. Jed, I know that we're running about 10 minutes behind, but please still take your full 15 minutes for your presentation, and we'll have Q&A after yours as well. I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present to this audience. It's always important for us to have this dialogue with various stakeholders in the industry. So my name is Jed Proctor with Daimler Truck North America. So I manage our zero emission vehicle infrastructure strategy group. So for us, this is all things that have to be put in place in order to make a transformation to any type of zero emission vehicle work. So let's go with the first slide. I wanted to tee it up with just a couple slides about who is Daimler Truck North America and what are we all about. So we're the largest manufacturer of commercial, medium, and heavy-duty vehicles in North America. We represent about 27,000-ish employees across North America, so a pretty solid workforce in the various locations you can see on the map there. I'm personally at our corporate headquarters in Portland, Oregon now, although I reside in Washington. So, a hearty welcome from myself to Commissioner Delment, who's representing the state of Washington. I live in Southwest Washington myself. Great to see some good hometown representation there. But we do a lot of manufacturing in and around the Carolinas, and then in Detroit, and then also in Mexico. So go to the next slide. So this is the range of vehicles that we offer. Under these as we have 5 major flagship brands that we offer vehicles and products under. So Freightliner, Thomas Built school buses, Western Star, our Freightliner custom chassis organization, and our Detroit powertrain group. So under Freightliner, you'll see a couple electrified offerings there in that first line. So we have our EM2, which is just starting to roll off factory line now. And then a little bit farther over, you'll see our E-Cascadia on-highway vehicle. These are both fully battery electric vehicles, the EM2 in the Class 6 and Class 7 space, and then the E-Cascadia in the Class 8 space. You see it's a day cab represented there. Really only the technology today is really suited for that day cab back to base operations. And one of the reasons is there's no public real good charging infrastructure over the road. So these vehicles aren't able to get too far away from home because they've always got to come back to their base of operations for charging. In the school bus line, we offer the one that's called the Safety Line or CT Julie. That's our electrified school bus. We are, using that term Julie as kind of tongue in cheek to represent that's an electrified vehicle. And then in the Freightliner custom chassis row there, you'll see the MT50E. That is an electrified version of our walk-in van chassis. So all fully electric vehicles. And then our powertrain, we have an electrified powertrain that's manufactured in our Detroit manufacturing facility. And our electrified axles go right down the production line next to our standard conventional engines and axles. So that's a little bit about who we are. On the previous slide, you may have noticed that we produce about 186,000 vehicles, or at least we did last year. It doesn't sound like a lot, but this is a market in North America that's about 400,000 units on an average year. So we represent a pretty significant market share. We play right around that 40% line. Okay, so that's a little bit about who Daimler Truck is and what we do in North America. Ray mentioned a little bit earlier, a little bit about our some of the upcoming rules and regulations. So I just wanted to pull one up as an example. So greenhouse gas phase 3 rules are coming. They start in 2027. The rule is still in ratification process, but we're pretty certain that this is going to affect us and start in 2027. So the greenhouse gas phase 3 requires us as a manufacturer to have a specific fleet mix such that our fleet average emissions profile meets a specific standard. With the rules as they are written today, we cannot remotely meet the standard if we sell a portfolio of 100% diesel products. So we have to have a mix of zero emission vehicles in. And if you look at the percentages in the table, that represents the percentage of the entire fleet vehicle mix sold in that given year that would need to be zero emissions in order for the industry and, beyond just Daimler Truck or Freightliner, but the entire industry to meet these greenhouse gas phase 3 regulations. So if we add those all up through 2032, what we get is an expected vehicle population of just under 1.5 million vehicles on the road that would need to be zero emissions. Now, we tend to agree with Ray in the beginning. Battery electric vehicles make a heck of a lot of sense from a total cost of ownership perspective. The key tipping point is really the cost of hydrogen. As Ray mentioned, his expectations of I think $8 to $11 per kilogram hydrogen is about twice what we need to see from a total cost perspective for hydrogen to be competitive. So it really makes sense that zero emission vehicles are going to be led by battery electric technology. There's also a bunch of engineering reasons why that is. And one of the reasons is a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle is an electric powertrain. So as we electrify vehicles, we can add hydrogen fuel cells as range extenders or things like that. But the technology path really goes straight through battery electric vehicles to get to something like a hydrogen fuel cell truck. So across the bottom, you'll see some expectations and just some kind of ballpark numbers of if those 1.5 million vehicles were all electric, what that would take from a charging capacity perspective, about 45 gigawatts of installed capacity. And you can see some ballpark numbers there about what we believe the total cost to the grid would be from funding for both charging equipment installation as well as other ancillary grid updates. All right, so if you can go to the next slide. So you can see this is my version of Ray's map. So this is an interesting map that we compiled. You can see it kind of highlights the major freight corridors in North America, but it represents something a little different than just where trucks are traveling today. This represents where trucks are stopping for significant lengths of time. So you can see the clusters around cities, freight zones, as well as ports and things like that. And so this really represents where vehicles are stopping and taking significant breaks. And so for us, we can take this data and translate that into where charging infrastructure would need to be available, where vehicles are already stopping, where they're overnighting, where they're parking for many hours at a time, and where we have opportunities to recharge them if those were battery electric vehicles. So this data is from our current fleet of trucks out on the road. It's a data set that represents over, I think it's up to 300,000 trucks by now. Again, we command a fairly large market share, so we think that the vehicle data from our vehicles that are in the marketplace and operating with our customers is pretty representative of the market at large. But yeah, really honed in on not just where trucks are traveling, but where they are resting, where they're stopping, and where they're overnighting. So next slide. So if we zoom into one of these areas, you can see this one just happens to be kind of down the road from us in a suburb outside of Portland, in this area called Troutdale, which is out by the airport. And this has really become kind of like a warehouse cross-dock facility location in Portland. And we're looking at, in a fairly small radius, needing about 18 megawatts of power to charge the fleet that regularly overnights and stays in that location. What we offer as a vehicle OEM is the ability to share these insights with utilities. We are happy to compile these data sets for each utility's geographic area of responsibility and share. Obviously, this is anonymized data, so you can't drill down all the way to the specific customer. But what this does is it gives you a really good understanding of where truck traffic happens, where trucks dwell, where they overnight in your regions, and can give you good confidence that in hotspots that happen within your utilities, that those are places that you can confidently make some investments. As Ray said, knowing that heavy duty transportation is going on in those locations and giving you confidence that the load is going to come. So I've got a couple more examples on the next slide here of 3 other hotspots, and I just highlighted these as examples. But here you can see Atlanta, Georgia, in this little circle area, 54 megawatts. Ontario, the Ontario Rancho Cucamonga region of Southern California. So you can see this is actually kind of away from the port, but this is what we call the Inland Empire in Southern California. So basically freight moves from the port out to this location. It's about 50 miles inland. And if you fly over or do a Google Maps view of this region, it's just white roof after white roof, warehouse after warehouse. There's about 500 different warehouses in that location. And pretty much all the freight that comes into the port of LA Long Beach moves by truck from the port out to this inland empire, and then gets warehoused, rerouted, relocated, cross-docked, and then shipped, put on the rail, taken off the rail, and shipped out to the rest of the country. And then the third one you'll see there is the Chicago, Illinois area. So there's a lot of these different hotspots of transportation, and we're happy to engage with our utility partners and share this data, share the locations to give you confidence of where load is going to be. So That's what we can offer and bring to the table. We have, of course, seen our fair share of both successes and challenges when it comes to our customers installing charging infrastructure. So temporary power solutions in the short term are really needed. And one of the reasons is that our customers need to learn with smaller deployments. They may have a business case for a 50 or 100 truck deployment, and some of our customers are going after it, but the majority of them are not willing to jump all in at once. And so they want to test and try and operate a small number of vehicles in order to learn and to grow their operations before they'll jump into large numbers of vehicles. So temporary power solutions are needed, quick power solutions are needed, and rules that allow such installations are getting people up and running. So this is a deployment in Southern California. On the left, you see a picture of this temporary, they call this temporary pole, but this is a pole that was set up through one of the temporary power solutions. And then it brings that power on site and is connected to this charging station you can see here in the middle picture. And this temporary power solution was a big win for us because what almost happened was the third picture you see. This customer was taking delivery of these very expensive trucks and needed to learn as much as possible. And they came very close to installing a diesel generator to power these things because there was some hurdles in getting temporary power on site. So I think the last thing any of us want to see are electric vehicles operating off of diesel gensets. But that kind of illustrates the hunger in the industry for operators, vehicle operators, to learn what this is going to be like. They need to grow confidence. As Ray said, the TCO is there and we believe it will be there, but customers need the opportunity to start small. So not diving in with a multi-megawatt site, but testing and trialing on smaller power, maybe temporary power that turns into a 4 or 5 megawatt installation. But the opportunity to start with a handful of trucks, to really learn the limitations, the pros and cons, how to route them, how to run them efficiently, how to operate them in their business is really key. So we at Daimler Truck definitely believe that the future is zero emissions. Right now, the business case is all pointed towards battery electric vehicles. We still have investments in hydrogen. I won't be as confident as Ray is in saying that hydrogen will be that small percentage of our portfolio. I think we've got some strategic investments in several hydrogen programs because we believe there could be a future for that. The economy and the market will really bear that out over time. But there is no doubt in our mind that the transition starts with electric vehicles, and especially in these regional short-haul port operations, there really is no substitute for a good battery electric truck in these operations. They perform well. They have a fantastic total cost of ownership for our customers if done correctly. And that is kind of a big if, but if done right and smartly, they can really produce the return. And regardless of how the long haul, situation turns out to be, that 500-600 mile route and what technology that adopts to is yet to be seen. But in this short and regional haul segment, for sure, battery electrics are going to be the leading technology for the foreseeable future. So that's all of my prepared remarks. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Jed. Really appreciate that. That was fascinating, and I definitely have some questions. But I think in the interest of time, let's do our final presentation from Amazon, Adam Raphael from Amazon, and then we'll combine the Q&A for the remaining time between you, Jed. Are you able to stick around for the next 15 minutes for Q&A?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So we'll combine the Q&A for both you and Adam towards the end of our time here. Adam, it's I know that you don't have slides, so we can take the presentation down and spotlight you, and would love to hear how Amazon is thinking about medium and heavy duty transportation.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about some of the learnings that we've had. I'm Adam Raphael. I lead a team that's responsible for developing and executing our plan to charge Amazon's fleet, which will be over 100,000 electric vehicles with clean, reliable, and cost-effective power. I'm joined today by my colleague, Nate Hill, who leads our public policy transportation group. So Nate will actually kick it off, and then I'll come back and talk a bit more about our experience in both medium duty and heavy duty vehicles.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Adam. I just wanted to sort of jump in and say hello to everybody and just give sort of a high level overview of Amazon's commitments and talk a little bit about a partnerships before I give it back to Adam to dive into the weeds about how we're executing and learning on this journey. But from our perspective as a fleet operator and sort of large company that has a commitment to what we have is called the Climate Pledge. So that is our commitment to be net zero carbon across the entire company by 2040. That includes sort of our last mile fleet of vehicles, a middle mile freight moving fleet of vehicles, our data centers, a network of over 5,000 buildings, and more growing around the world. So we're not shy about this challenge. We know it's a large challenge, but it's sort of the type of challenge we sort of relish here at Amazon, to sort of think big and pursue big goals. And so we're here to talk today about our experience with some of these programs and transitioning our vehicle fleet. And Adam can give you some insights into how we're doing that and how we are also bullish on electrification. But it's very important that we have sort of a lot of partners that are with us on this journey. So we depend on the OEMs and the utilities and the NGOs and the research from the labs and everyone in this ecosystem, including utility regulators, to make this happen. So we're very excited. We know it's a big challenge for us in the industry. But we think it's also very exciting. And so I'll turn it over to Adam now to let him sort of dive into the details of our work here. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Nate. Yeah, as Nate mentioned, in 2019, Amazon co-founded the Climate Pledge, and as part of that, we made a commitment to also to purchase over 100,000 vehicles from Rivian and by 2030. I think what's helpful to give a little bit of the landscape of how we're thinking about this transition. And I'll talk a bit about first starting with last mile and then kind of talking about middle mile. And what we consider our last mile is the delivery vans that are Amazon branded delivery vans that are delivering to your houses and businesses today. And I think as we talked about and heard earlier, back in 2019 when we started this program, we saw the TCO on these medium duty vehicles really being very competitive and actually advantageous to combustion engine vehicles. And so really saw that as the first kind of place where we were going to transition to zero emission vehicles, and really saw that that electric vehicles there, from a TCO perspective, they're really well suited for that last mile medium duty use case. In general, just to give you a little bit of background on how these these routes, and again, this is how Amazon does it, but it is from, one of the things that we've learned through this process is we've been very open about a lot of these, about how we're working, both with our, partners across utilities, and OEMs, but also, really across other companies that are doing it, because our goal is to, both for us, but also to kind of push the industry that way. But what we saw was last mile, it works really nicely for electric vehicles, because in general, these routes are anywhere from 40 to 90 kind of miles per day. The vehicles generally reside overnight and for us, they reside at our distribution stations. They charge. We're using generally, we've started with L2 chargers, and found that, given that low sort of mileage that they're driving, they have the time, the dwell time within the station to be able to charge overnight, and then go and deliver, and then come back to the station, and kind of repeat that cycle. So we found that really advantageous in the last mile space. And just to give a little bit of view on sort of where we are in that space, today we have over 5,000 electric vehicles on the road in more than 800 cities, and we're completing work on our 10,000th L2 charger in our network. We are on a path to grow that, as I mentioned, to over 100,000 vehicles over the next several years, and we'll continue to really expand that across the entire country. In order to be successful in this endeavor, one of the things that we recognized very early on was that, and I love that slide at the beginning about sort of what do you need to be able to do this, and is the vehicle available? Does the TCO work? And can you do it from a power and infrastructure perspective? That's really what we've found to be, the longest pole as we've kind of gone down this path. And the way that we've tried to approach it is really to take a very collaborative approach. We started by really trying to understand what our use case was. And this is something we've shared widely, because I think, it's been mentioned before, when customers start to think about transitioning to EVs, we don't really know what those use cases are. We start initially, I'll be really honest, when Amazon first started thinking about it, we were thinking we needed every vehicle to have an L3 50 to 100 kW charger and a 1-to-1 vehicle to charger ratio. So if you do the math on that, what that would have said is each of our delivery stations on average have about 200 vehicles. That would be looking at like 20 to 30 megawatts per delivery station, right? And there was this sort of concern of, well, we need to build for the future. We need to think about it. We need to sort of, and really what we did is we stepped back and said, okay, what's our use case? How are we going to use it? What are the constraints? What is the energy modeling that we need to do? And we're really able to recognize that, what we needed at these last mile delivery stations was in the neighborhood of kind of 4 to 6 megawatts. And that really, we will have our edge cases. We'll have the ones that might be the 8 to 10 megawatts, and then we'll have the really small stations in some of our dense metro areas. But that really helped us understand what our use cases is, and something that we've been really trying to share through entities such as EEI and others, of the learnings that we've gotten going through that process. The second thing we really recognized was the need to present our power plans to our utility partners, and really trying to move away from the model of just put an application in one after the other and not give visibility into within this utilities territory, we'll have 20 or 30 sites, and helping them understand where we're planning to put those EVs, what's the ramp, and how fast we're looking to do it. Because one of the things we quickly realized is that, you know, the normal planning cycles, that as we've worked with our utility partners, if they think about a new building that might be, you know, in that 3 to 5 megawatt, a facility, or you know, a small development. Generally, the timeline they're thinking on that is, you know, 3 to kind of 5 years from start to completion. But when we think about it, you know, what we're really looking for vehicle deployment is 18 months or less, right? So you kind of have this change in the sort of the time frame, and it doesn't work if you're just sort of putting in an application and then, you know, waiting that 3 to 5 years. So what we found was really trying to share our 5-year power plan by site with our key utility partners was really something advantageous. And as we started doing that, we got a lot of positive feedback. But one of the things we recognized was that, you know, the utilities were saying that's great, but we need to see that from more customers, and we need to be able to really bring that sort of consolidated information together, not just for Amazon, but what is it going to look like for the other customers, so that they, as they're kind of coming to, you know, putting together their multi-year plans and bringing it to yourselves and on the commissions, that they have that supporting data that shows that, you know, that they have that customer demand. So that's one of the reasons that we're really excited about a recent partnership that we've joined up with EPRI's EV to Scale initiative, and really we were recently the first logistics partner to join that, and really excited. I know Daimler is a founding partner on that too. For us, we see that as a great way to bring transparent, validated data to the industry on where this demand is going to come, because ultimately we see that will be something that will really serve both Amazon, but also the industry and customers at large. So that's kind of one of the things that we've done as we've approached that. As we move to sort of thinking about what we talk about the middle mile, and that's more the heavy duty vehicles, the class 6 through 8 trucks. I'll be really honest, right now, we're really struggling, or not struggling, but we're working through the same questions that were just discussed in the prior 2 presentations. How do we think about the different technologies, battery, hydrogen, and even looking at you know, renewable natural gas. And what we see today is very similar to what was presented earlier. Is, you know, where the economics sit today, we sort of see that there is going to be some mix between the different technologies. And that being said, we definitely believe that there is going to be a significant portion of that will have the electric, you know, that will be electric, and that we really do need to ensure that infrastructure and the power supply is built out ahead of it. Again, as was really well displayed in those maps, there's going to be, when we think about the middle mile vehicles, where we'll have a mix of, some of it will be charged on site within our distribution centers or fulfillment centers, but then there is going to be over the road charging that's needed across these corridors. And again, you know, there clearly we're going to need a higher powered, you know, 500 kW and up to, you know, even the megawatt charging. So we really see that within last mile and middle mile, they're in kind of different places today. But, you know, I think we're quite, you know, we've embraced that we need to find ways to find these zero emission vehicles. And really, I think the biggest piece that we see is really kind of getting out in front of the long lead kind of power requirements. I'll just wrap up with two quick sort of asks or thoughts. Two of them are, one, I think the pace of change is going to happen a lot quicker than we all think. The TCOs are really becoming definitely on the medium duty and in addition, on the heavy duty, TCO is becoming quite attractive. I think from what we hear from ourselves, but also our other other customers, people are making that move. And then the second is this idea around partnership and collaboration. We're really here to be open. We see it as the right thing to do for both ourselves and for the industry at large. So with that, happy to take any questions and appreciate the opportunity to speak with everyone today.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Adam. Thanks, Nate. Appreciate the presentation and Amazon's perspective. I know you mentioned EPRI's EVs to Scale initiative, and we'll definitely set up a time for this working group to be able to hear from EPRI and hear about that initiative, because I do think that there's a lot of value there, and there's a lot of good research that's going to come out of that. And thanks for your participation in that. I want to open this up to other questions. Okay, yeah, Eric, I'll let you go first, and then I have a few as well. And anybody else who wants to jump in, please feel free to either put them in the chat or raise a hand. Eric, go ahead.